A very warm welcome and a very good evening to all the participants and the panelists. Ms. Tanvi from the Prabhav team, am I audible as well as visible? Just doing one quick check.
Yes.
All right, thank you. So a very warm welcome to all the panelists. So let me just introduce the panelists. And before I do so, let me introduce myself. I'm Dr. Smita Desai from Drishti, and welcome everyone on this platform to yet another edition of our Wednesday webinars. Today, the topic is on social emotional learning and how it can impact us in our personal lives as well as in our everyday professional lives as well. So our panelists for today, and I would like to start off with Dr. Dakshayani. Dr. Dakshayani Khanna is the Principal and Director of Harvest School in Bangalore. Dakshayani has been an educator for more than 3 decades, almost 4 decades, I think. And she has, started and operated a number of schools, both in India as well as overseas. Dakshayani and I have met several times as CBSE master trainers and have had some wonderful conversations. So Dakshayani, a very warm welcome, and I look forward to some further stimulating conversation today. Our other panelist is Ms. Mary. Ms. Mary Yusuf is a senior faculty at the Indus Training and Research Institute. As you all might be knowing, the Indus Schools is a group of schools where they have both day and boarding schools. This is a wonderful organization which is trying to do a number of different progressive and dynamic things, as well as also having a very effective and systematic teacher training institute, of which I have also been a visiting faculty. So Ms. Mary, a very warm welcome, and I'm sure that we look forward to what you have to contribute to the conversation today. And of course, our third panelist, Dr. Varsha Deshmukh. Thank you. Dr. Varsha Deshmukh. Varsha, welcome back. And so nice to have you join us again. The participants of our Wednesday webinars, just I think about 2 webinars ago, were really so happy with your, with the inputs that you gave at the last webinar. Varsha is, has a wonderful mix of being both a medical person. So Varsha is a pediatrician as well as a psychotherapist. Varsha currently also does some telecounseling, etc. She actually works both in India and in the US. She's currently, of course, here in India for a while, and is, joining us on these webinars. And I think her presence is, very, very contributory to some really nice perspectives and viewpoints that we get from Varsha. So welcome all of you. And just a word to all the participants. There will be some questions that I will be seeding and starting this whole conversation with this wonderful team of panelists that we have here. I would certainly welcome your questions on the chat box, but I have a simple request, and that is that just keep your questions very simple, right? And if possible, then also tell me whom you want to address this to, because that makes it kind of simpler for me, right? But just put your questions down as simply as possible, so that that's how it goes forward to the panelists. So my intent in taking up this topic of social emotional learning, was for a multifold, reasons, right? And one was, of course, to speak about the approaches which are preventive in nature with reference to the social, emotional, behavioral challenges we see around us. What happens is that we tend to, at large, the community tends to have a knee-jerk reaction when something like a case of bullying or suicide, a case of domestic violence suddenly attracts the attention of the media, and it is all out in the media, and that's when suddenly everyone wakes up and starts questioning these issues. However, I think the way forward, which we all know, is to be more preventive in nature, right? But that's something that we are really going to have to make an effort to do. My second reason in taking up social emotional learning was to remind the stakeholders who are present here today that we are already using a number of the components of the SEL approach. We just need to get to know the SEL approach better. We need to get to, put these together and use it in a structured way so that we are getting some effective and measurable outcomes. Yeah. So with that, there we go. My first question is to Dr. Varsha. And before I start my question, I would request all participants to ensure that you're on mute. Okay. And only my panelists to unmute themselves. Thank you so much. So my first question to you, Varsha, is that if you can please explain the concept and the framework for social emotional learning, and kind of very briefly also tell the participants about what might be the 5 core competencies, okay, of the SEL framework, and how they will be used, and how we, what we can get implications from them, that we'll of course take on in our conversation, but just to kind of clarify the concept and framework of social emotional learning. Over to you, Varsha.
Okay, thank you very much for the welcome, and nice to meet the other panelists. Nice to be here today. Well, so what is the ultimate goal of education, any education? The ultimate goal is to build character, because that's with what we engage in the world. But character is really a very difficult outcome to measure, and there is still no consensus yet as to whether character can be taught. So what are the markers, if I may, what are the markers for character that we can see, can measure, and can teach, and that we have enough literature that we can teach these things? And those are essentially our behaviors. Our behaviors, our attitudes, our personality, our motivations. These are tangible, visible markers for what lies within, and that's character. So, as you rightly said, that, these are techniques that we use in education, we use in therapy, we use in a lot of preventive modalities, but there are certain organizations that have done us the favor of organizing this approach into programs so that we can train faculty, so that we can train various professionals who are engaged in child welfare and advocacy. And so one of them is the CASEL program. So that does the SEL, or the Social Emotional Learning Organized Program, and it's associated with the University of Chicago now. Before, it was a freestanding collaborative. And then there is another one, there's the SEE, that's the Social Emotional Ethical Learning Program, which is a newer program out of Emory University, and that's associated with the Dalai Lama Foundation, and that is very largely influenced by mindfulness, and it's part of their contemplative sciences department. So we have 2 big programs, but they're essentially discussing the same thing, and that's social emotional learning. A very brief sentence about the history of SEL is the word emotional intelligence was first used in 1965, but it did not become popular until Daniel Goleman brought out his book in, I think, 95 or 97. And the collaborative for social emotional learning came about also in the 90s, early 90s in California. And so what is essentially, what is it about? It's about integrating strategies and skills that people should use in life as life skills, integrating them into kindergarten to 12th grade education. So the K to 12 education years should be integrated, not just academics and athletics and extracurricular activities, but a social emotional learning thing. So you can have freestanding social emotional learning activities, and you can have a lot of attitudes that are used in the classroom, no matter what you're teaching. What are the 5 core competencies that Smita just referred to? And that is, as described by the SEL program. The SEE adds on some more to it. And if you have time, I can add, I can say a little bit about that. So the definition of SEL is that students should develop all the social and emotional competencies that come under these 5 categories. There are many, but they're in 5 categories. So it's the knowledge, the skills, the attitudes, and behaviors, very important because it has to be reflected in behaviors. It can't just be theoretical, that individuals need to make successful choices in life. Now, those choices may be internal choices of how we are going to process how we feel, or they're going to be external choices in how we manifest in our behaviors and our work and our interaction with other people. So let me go straight to the categories because I don't want to encroach on anyone else's time. Point number 1, or this competency number 1, is self-awareness. So that's who we are within. So it is an awareness of our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, whether we can label them or not, and also our strengths and weaknesses as we see them, and how confident are we? What's our self-confidence level? What is our self-efficacy opinion about ourselves? There's a difference between self-confidence and self-esteem on the one hand and self-efficacy on the other hand, which is more to do with how effective we think we're going to be in the world. And do we have optimism? How grounded in reality is that optimism? And how accurate is our self-perception of ourselves? So that's self-awareness, number 1, who we are within. Number 2 is what do we do without, what do we do as in outside of ourselves. So that is self-management. The second one is self-management. So impulse control, stress management, our discipline, motivation, the goals we set for ourselves, organization, skills, and whether we can handle feedback constructively. So these are all self-management. So these 2 are about the self. Then we come to others around us. So that is social awareness. That's the awareness function. And how aware are we of other people's feelings? Can we feel for them? That's empathy. Can we put ourselves in their shoes? Can we take their perspective and across a diverse group of people? So it shouldn't just be someone who's like us. It should be literally everybody, and we should appreciate diversity. That's a very important thing, the word appreciation. And I'll talk about it later, especially with the SEE, if I get a moment, about how gratitude and appreciation fits in to all of these, really, in a mindfulness way. Okay, so where was I? Social awareness. And that's basically about understanding others. So the first 2 points were about understanding and managing ourselves. This one was about understanding other people with empathy. Okay, so and respect. All of this comes under respect. Okay, so the 4th thing is relationships. So social awareness is about society as a whole, and within that society, we have individuals. So we're going to interact in relationships. So that is relationship, healthy relationships, and whether we are able to have the skills to engage in those and build healthy relationships. And the 5th, or the last competency, is about making choices, because that affects all of the above. So responsible decision making. And in the SEE, ethics is a very, very strong part of this. So that is ethical decision making. So whether how we identify problems, analyze them, approach solving them, then reassess, evaluate, take feedback, whether we are able to reflect on ourselves and on the problem and on everything else that happened. So that's a sort of maturity that comes with time, but ethics and responsibilities are a part of it. There's more, but I think I'm done with my time, right, Smita?
Yes. Thank you so much, Varsha. I think that was a good beginning, and everyone's on the same page about these 5 competencies. And if I may say so, I mean, these are also the pillars of when we talk or we learn about emotional intelligence, right? Yeah. All about the self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, etc. So these are all the pillars of emotional intelligence. And from here, I'm going to move on to Dakshayani. Dakshayani, we've Dr. Varsha has also just spoken about self-esteem, self-confidence, and I think that self-esteem is at the very core, right, of everything that we do. So, you know, as a leader, as a school leader for so many years, and right now also leading the Harvest School, how might you be building this self-esteem, self-confidence in students on a daily basis as a part of your routine in school, whether curriculum, routine, whatever? How do you do this on a real basis?
Um, Thank you so much, Smita, for having me here. And basically, Varsha has given what exactly are the skills that are required for social emotional well-being of the student. As soon as we talk of a school, the first thing that comes to everybody's mind is academics. And it is academics that we are looking at. There is something seriously wrong with what is expected. And especially during this condition, when we are looking at children not able to handle themselves, not able to be resilient, the first thing that you actually look into is self-confidence. It's not only students, it's also the teachers, because in this situation, they're expected to do a lot of things which they never did before. And, all this will come in if the mindset changes. And this is where we start with. Every academic calendar that we plan, it's not only academics, but it is going to have a lot of activities and a deliberate effort to put in these qualities that Varsha spoke about. The first thing we need to accept is every child is unique. So we cannot be saying that we are going to be fair for the children and have the same thing for everybody. It is not going to work anymore. Probably our education system was like that, but currently the first thing is to ensure that it is not fair to treat everybody in the same way that we treat. So make sure that acceptance is there, that you need to actually build up the confidence of the child, saying that everybody need not get 100 on 100. Everybody need not be good at singing. Everybody need not be good at it. So that would be the first thing the child as well as the teacher to accept. So there are certain activities which we plan to ensure that we actually observe the child and find out what are the best qualities that the child has, and a deliberate appreciation of that quality in group, so that they get their confidence. Making them responsible is the second thing. See, they are responsible for certain things, and if you especially make them contribute to the school community as such, they become all the more confident because they have the ownership and they feel proud to be a part of this. This is done very deliberately, looking into those kids whose self-confidence is slightly low, or they are given first preference, and we ensure that that is put in the calendar, and the teacher knows which children are supposed to be handled in this month and what is going to be the plan of action that has to be made. The third thing that we do is we make sure that students take ownership to solve their own problems. I was just going through one of the courses of Harvard University, and there was a beautiful explanation of how we take others' problems. They were mentioning that you carry a backpack, when you are actually having a bag and then carrying it. When somebody comes and says, "I have this problem," your immediate reaction is going to be, "Okay, let me look at this, and then I'll get back to you." So you have another problem in your bag to solve. Whereas that person who has told you has already got rid of that problem, and it is there with you right now. Instead of that, if we can actually teach problem solving skills to the children and let them handle themselves, they get self-confidence, saying that, yes, I can do this. I don't have to depend on anybody else, but I can do it myself. Helping children to have self-discipline is another thing that we do, because in everything that we do, we have a voice of the child coming in, whether it is going to be the rules in the class, whether it is going to be the consequences that will happen due to discipline. So automatically they take ownership because they are a part of rule making, and the essential agreement basically makes them bound to it. So because they have been a part of it, and they become disciplined. So automatically half the things are taken care of. Making sure that they are open. They have to have that self-advocacy skills. They should stand up for themselves and say, "This is what I feel. This is what I do." These are also done through a different activities, starting from assembly up till essay writing or leadership roles that we give them. All of that is thought through and put into the calendar. And lastly, removing the fear of making mistakes. happens because, I've seen teachers getting into classroom, and if a child is asked a question and he's not able to answer, automatically the teacher moves to a person who knows the answer. So which means you're putting the child down, his confidence goes down, saying that I don't know anything, the other child actually knows. To stop this, stopping with the child who has not been able to answer and talking to him, can we solve this together? Let us find the answer together, rather than allowing another child to take over. If we actually consider such things, I would say a lot of confidence building automatically happens. And teachers are trained on this on regular basis.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dakshani. I think you covered some very salient points here, right from, accepting that every individual is unique, to problem solving, decision making, and I think very important, remove that fear of failure. I think that's something we really need to work on. And I'm going to take a little thread from your conversation where you said that, social emotional skills are not only important for the children, but also for the teachers, right? And with that, I'm coming to my next question to Mary. Mary, how, how might you be building, social emotional skills in the teachers when you're doing teacher training, right? So, yeah. How do you build them? And are there any specific emotional social skills that you look at building?
Yeah. So before for me, Dr. Desai, is the fact that I'm talking from having had the experience of being on both sides of the fences. I've been a teacher for quite a number of years, and now I'm also in teacher education. So what we focus is, and what we think at least we in ITARI feel that teachers need is something that we call as, the emotional agility, where teachers need to build in themselves the ability to recognize patterns and feelings. And from that, in fact, not by identifying those patterns, they should be able to name the pattern for themselves and for their children. Okay. And the next step would be for them to be able to accept those feelings. And the last step, of course, to act on those feelings. So the simplest example, and then I'll move on to what exactly we feel that needs to be done in teacher education and what we are doing. The simplest example for all of these 4 stages that I would say is, I'm sure many of you have read the children's literature book, The Dot, by Peter Reynolds. So beautifully, that illustrated book in just about, I think, 7 pages has clearly described what a teacher could do to a child, how beautifully she takes the child's painting, which is just a dot, and she makes the child a painter. And it doesn't end there. She's built the disposition to the extent where the child is now able to do the same to another child, to her peer. That is emotional intelligence, because the teacher could have reacted in any which ways. She could have said, why are you handing me an empty paper? Isn't it? Yes, The Dot by Peter Reynolds. So the teachers just handed over an empty paper, and the child says, I can't draw. I'm not good at drawing. Somebody has filled that in her. So this is what, when Dr. Dakshani was talking about how children come with some kind of a baggage, and sometimes we teachers unknowingly fill that bag for them. So it is that immediate emotional agility that teachers showed in that classroom that enabled that child and enabled her peers to actually get into that field of drawing. And so it's a generalized story, but it's a beautiful real life evidence. So for us in teacher education, what we are looking at is, we have noticed what happens is there are many institutes. In fact, even Drishti is one of those lovely institutes who's trying to bring about a transformational shift in teachers' mindset, a transformational shift even in children's the way they handle problems. But what is happening is, most of the times we are engaged in a day's workshop because of the time factor and many other factors. We forget that what happens in that day's workshop is, the teachers have the wow factor during that time, and they really sincerely want to do those things, but there is the sustained application of what is being taught is missing. So for us, or I firmly believe that in teacher education, when you're looking at building emotional intelligence, we are looking at building the ability of a teacher being able to become a decision maker. She is going to become tolerant. adaptability to situation, being a good communicator. Another key 21st century skill that is required is being a good collaborator, and leadership quality automatically. All of these imbibe in the leadership quality. It's a requirement for the leadership. And the trust factor between her and the child in the classroom. So these are the areas that we want to build in our teachers. And as Teacher Education Institute, that's what our focus is. So,
right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mary.
Yeah, Dr. Desai, do I also talk about how we do it, or should I do, because I don't want to eat up on the time that you have either.
Yes. So, I would say that rather than the how, which I will be coming to, I think you have put on in terms of, what are some of the skills, social emotional skills, and you've also told us why. So I will be coming to, the how. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So, Varsha, my next question to you would be that, also the topic of this is social emotional learning for happy classrooms is the topic of our webinar, right? And, to put it very briefly, how I understand happy classrooms are basically happy classrooms are those which are primarily built on positive relationships, right? Thus, what do you feel is the role that social emotional learning can play in creating this happy classroom?
That's a very nice question. So let's go with our working definition of happiness to begin with. So happiness is kind of a baseline emotion as it is defined in positive psychology right now. It is a general pervasive sense that things are going all right, things are going in the right direction, and I am going to be all right. So it doesn't mean the absence of unhappiness, because life happens to everybody. So if we have a baseline, then we're going to have downs when unhappiness happens, and then we're going to have ups when celebratory things happen and achievements happen. But our baseline is that things are generally going in the right direction, and we're going to be okay. So what are the two things, the two parts of being okay? Again, if we go to our competencies, one is what's within. Is what internal resources do we have that make us feel we're going to be okay? That's our resiliency and our gratitude with a capital G. That's so important. Appreciation, all those qualities. So the internal qualities and the external resources, which is our relationships with our environment and the individuals in our environment. So as you mentioned, the relationships within a classroom are between your peers and with your teachers, and then with the other adults that form the school environment. So if you have good relationships, really in a school, it doesn't matter, the walls don't matter, the desks and the blackboard doesn't matter, or the smart board, it matters what the relationships are. Now, how are we going to have good relationships unless we have the basic skills of building good, healthy relationships? So we need social and emotional smarts or basic skills to form those healthy relationships so that we can manage our emotions, especially negative emotions, and focus on the positive emotions, feel empathy for the other person, build bonds, and have good relationships. We can give help, we can seek help, and these are two-way relationships. But they will only occur in a safe space. So if we create a safe space in school, then social emotional learning can happen. And once those kids have those skills, happiness is the byproduct, because that is a sense of well-being that, okay, I may not have done so well in these exams, or maybe something bad happened at home or somewhere else or something else, but I have all these friends. I have a teacher I trust. I have other teachers I trust. I have other faculty members, principal, gym teacher, whatever. I have adults who trust me, who I trust, and all these friends of mine who feel for me if something goes wrong. So even if something goes wrong, I'm okay. So that is a kind of happiness. So and when good things happen, of course, you share the good things with everybody else. So you have happy classrooms when everyone in that area has social and emotional skills to form those relationships. And that happens when we create a safe environment, learning environment of trust and appreciation.
Thanks, Varsha. Thanks. I think you've woven it very nicely together. While you were talking, I was thinking about, all those competencies that we spoke about of SEL, and, both how Dakshayani spoke about, putting together your self-awareness, self-management, and how it is getting into relationship building. And, because nowadays there's a lot of talk about, happy classrooms is like a buzzword, but really what encompasses it? And, I like the way you've put it that, the baseline is that we are okay, we're moving along all right, and then there are going to be ups and downs. And I think it's really important that all of us are able to manage those ups and downs in a balanced way. I think that's really what we're going to be, aiming for. And so Dakshayani, I'm very, I feel that, that's my perspective, that, something like values, ethics, that's something that, comes from the home, further reinforced in schools. And I think it helps us in that one competency of SEL we talk about, and that is responsible decision making. Okay. So what light can you throw on, what might be, again, I come back to what might you all in school be doing to ensure that, we are working on building up good ethical development, value-based thinking for your students?
See, basically, this is very, very important in today's generation, See, they believe in things that probably what they have seen, as you rightly said, the ethics and values that actually come to students comes from people who surround them. One is they are looking at their parents and other adults who are there at home or in their societies, in their apartments or teachers. And definitely that will have an impact, as people say that they don't listen to what you say, but they imitate you and they do what they feel like. Basically, children have to be taught gratitude. There is no gratitude today. People feel that, they are entitled for things, and especially when you look at kids, they've been brought up in such a way, and, they feel that they have the right for everything, whether it is going to be the marks or whether it is going to be the behavior, whether it is going to be anything. So they feel that it's okay to bribe somebody and get the work done. It is okay to cheat and not submit the homework. So that has become a norm, and it becomes very, very difficult. So there is a value plan. Ethics and values is one of the things which is very, very close to my heart. And also my teachers are completely into it because they need to know what are the things that are respected in the society and they actually value. Again, coming to Indian values and talking about Indian culture, culture definitely is very important. But when you talk about values, it's going to be universal. So it is human values and it is universal values. Of course, they are Indian values also. But then, when you're talking to them, it has to be like, it should be an inclusive talk that you're going to. So ethics and values are built in everything that we do because it cannot be taught as a separate topic, or a class cannot be dedicated to that because it becomes another subject and children are evaluated on that. So when you're teaching them, say, nuclear fission, nuclear fusion, whatever you're going to talk to them, talk about the after effects of misuse. You talk about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You talk about what is happening. When you're talking about Ram Janmabhoomi today, you also talk about Babri Masjid. Ensure that the children understand both sides of the coin. You might be very happy today, but at the same time, you also should be sensitive to people who are not there in your group, because it has to be a universal thing which have to get into classrooms in every lesson plan. Basically, teachers do that. It is not something that is forced. It automatically goes. We start talking from being ethical in terms of, submitting and being orderly, being very prompt, to plagiarism. You're looking at, okay, you've picked up something from internet. To that level, ethics and, values are incorporated in regular classrooms. Apart from that, every activity that they do, whether it is the assembly activity, whether it is going to be a week of August, which they will celebrate as Patriotic Week, and what needs to be done. So any activity and every activity that is done in the class, starting from them treating their mates and drivers properly, from there all the activities will be planned and included, and teachers ensure that they also follow and they become role models. It is very difficult to understand because, sometimes it's so scary, because I have seen classes in kindergarten wherein teachers get into the class, and if the teacher is an introvert, not very good in dancing and singing, the whole class turns out to be that kind when they come into grade 1. It's very scary of influence teachers can have on kids. So here, a value addition after deciding what are the things that we require is done, and every year we change that and we alter that depending upon the requirement, depending upon the data available on student behavior, and we feel that these are the things that have to be incorporated.
Right. So Dakshani, just one question on this. When I was listening to you, that these are all the activities done, and but is it also something which is kind of in a way explained, in a way put forward fairly clearly to the students, that we are talking about ethics, we are talking about social behavior? I mean, are they in that sense? Because not everyone is going to understand implications. Not everyone is going to probably engage in the activity in the same way. So is there any that kind of a direct instructional approach? Just very curious, that's all.
It is there. Basically what happens is ethics and value, how it can be a part of their academic calendar is actually decided in the beginning, and teachers are trained on that. And the counselors and teacher counselors, all my teachers, almost 50% of them have then done their courses as counselors. So they come up with a module, and we train senior students, especially 9 to 12, on basic ethics and values that are required. They are collaborators in making the value plan for the school. Then they do workshops for the smaller kids. They do workshops for the smaller kids, so that they understand what are the expectations and what they need to learn. And then it gets into the activities. Yes, that planner is done, Dr. Smita.
Right. Thank you so much, Dakshani. I was just curious on this, So Mary, I think it would be nice for you to kind of, your training teachers, the teachers you've trained will also be coming back to you at some point, you have a dialogue, whatever. So what, according to you, are some, and you've been a teacher yourself, of course, what, according to you, are some of the major struggles that teachers are facing with students in the classroom? And how, so I'm going to bundle my second question into this also. How might you be able to apply this social emotional learning for teachers to be able to handle these struggles? So first, if you can just focus on just one or two major struggles that teachers are facing in the classroom, and how you would apply SEL to this.
So Dr. Desai, what I see is, again, because of my background, I feel that many a times the struggles that teachers face are quite similar, or in fact very similar to the struggles that students face. For example, students have the inability to learn, and sometimes teachers are not able to explain why, because they are intelligent children. There are those specific days, so you have behavioral issues because of that. You see a complete lack of interest, lack of involvement in what they are doing. So the teacher is also as clueless as the child. So it's a challenge that you see from both ends. The second one that you saw, sometimes you also see physical symptoms in children, a physical symptom that could be associated with fear. It could be a personal fear, or because of something from the family, or it could also be something that happens in the school, and that tends to indicate in the child, or bring a little fear, and that fear tends to become lack of confidence, distractions in the class, and non-involvement in any team activities, any collaborative activities. You don't see it. So I'm just going to restrict myself to those, because if you ask me about the challenges teachers and children face, I think it's going to become a never-ending list. And one of the main reasons is children have these conflicting expectations. There are these expectations from parents, there are these expectations from the teachers, there are expectations from all the stakeholders, and most importantly, what then gets under the rug is the fact that the children have their own expectations. How are they then able to bring that out and say, you know what, this is what I want to be, this is what I want to become, this is what I want to do? So our idea is to enable teachers to develop in themselves, like Dr. Varsha had mentioned earlier, to build self-awareness in them. Because now, when I say self-awareness, I'm going to now talk about it from a teacher educator. The teacher herself should have the ability to recognize what are her strengths, what are her challenges, how are her strengths going to impact the student in her class, how can she make that, use her strength to impact her child positively. And she needs to at the same time reflect on her own challenges. So the self-awareness of what I am is very, because that what I am, the self-awareness is what makes her become the person that she is in the classroom. The second is the ability to manage her emotions in the classroom. Because most of the times what happens is, because of this overload that teachers have, we tend to become a little reactive than proactive in the classroom. So if I know my emotions, if I'm able to understand, deepen it through reading, by discussing it with my peers, discussing it with my coordinator, counselor, anybody, I'm able to understand what are those moments that I have when I actually get reactive. And how do I become proactive in the class? How do I ignore certain things in the class? Because sometimes teachers, even for the minutest things that happen in the class, a child is, just, moving his pencil and we get irritated. Why don't you sit straight? I think gone are the times where we can, restrict our children from moving in the class. So our emotional agility is what is going to help us, ignore this or have a conversation with the child. Again, what Dr. Varsha had mentioned earlier, the social awareness, the ability, which is so important, the ability to understand my children's emotion in the class. I need to understand, why is my child happy today? Why is my happy child sad today? So these are the things that I need to understand in the class. Another important, again, the 21st century skill is collaboration, which is so important for teachers in the first place. So the focus in ITARI is for us to enable all our teachers, be it the pre-service teachers or the in-service teachers, to build these 4 focus areas in them. And what we do is, nothing is done in silos. They are blended into our curriculum, be it, if we are exploring the curriculum, be it exploring pedagogical strategies, be it exploring classroom strategies. How does one use, develop classroom strategies? And most importantly, the ideology itself, because the environment should lend to building emotional intelligence. So these are the 4 areas that we focus on in ITARI.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Mary. I think that was really very useful. Very nice application. And Varsha, there is a question in the chat, which I'm going to direct to you. And she had Pranali Garge. She had put it some time ago. I was just trying to kind of fit it into our conversation. And so she said, how to develop tolerance in adolescent years. I'm going to kind of put that together with my next question for you. And that is that, what skills do socially and emotionally competent children and youth have? So, what are the benefits of SEL? Socially and socially emotional competent youth, you tend to see a particular way they behave, the kind of a profile that they have. And then also, along with that, if you can also respond to Pranali's question as to how you can develop tolerance and, connect that SEL with the tolerance for us, that would be great.
Okay, so I'll address her question first. It's a very nice question. Thank you. So tolerance means you are tolerating something that you find undesirable. So we are starting off with a compromise, and the other side of it, when we are teaching social and emotional intelligence and learning, what we want to teach in a proactive way is empathy, which is an antidote to the whole problem of finding other people and other things undesirable. So when you have empathy, when you put yourself in the shoes of somebody else and you understand them and you understand where they're coming from, it's difficult to find them undesirable. So that situation itself goes away when you have a socially, emotionally intelligent person, is because they are curious, they are intellectually. And I love this thing about the Dalai Lama. I love it so much. He always talks about the head, the heart, and the hand, right? So the SCE program at Emory University has really actually used that. Intellectually, we can understand that, okay, this is something different. But with our heart, with our empathy and compassion, when we say, oh, this is how it is for this person, this is where they're coming from, it's like, I feel for this person. So there is no need for tolerance. You've already got into that person's shoes.
Right.
What did you ask me, Smita? I forgot.
So about the tolerance, and then exactly what you're talking about, and that is, what are some of the skills, that we see in socially, emotionally competent youth?
Right. So it's what we talked about before, is these children, once they have got this, whether they're teens or children, they are self-aware. So again, going back to that question, if someone is having trouble with tolerance, they're able to reflect on it and say, I'm getting irritated and annoyed because I'm not feeling empathy. I'm self-aware about it. And if you have learned about choices that you have in the moment, like right now I'm getting irritated, I have reflected on it, I'm getting annoyed because I'm feeling intolerant about that, and I can talk to a peer who is also socially, emotionally educated and intelligent, who hopefully there'll be a positive peer influence when the whole cohort or the classroom has these skills to able to de-escalate someone's negative feelings and to promote someone's positive feelings. What we really ultimately are aiming for is positive peer pressure in a cohort of peers. And the same thing amongst teachers, you support each other within your cohort, whether you're a teacher or whether you're a student. And then between the two cohorts of the adults and the teens and the children, you have a kind of vertical slope where you have support going on in that direction as well. So when you see someone doing something good, you appreciate it. You're not stingy with your praise. So they get positive reinforcement. When you see someone doing something negative, you have learned effective communication. So respectfully and appropriately, you can give feedback. Then again, that person has learned how to accept feedback and take that criticism constructively. And then, it's a symbiotic two-way relationship in every one of those competencies. So kids who can identify emotions, manage them, behave in appropriate ways, manage their impulses, be empathetic, kind, seek help and give help, and feel invested in each other's happiness and each other's well-being, it's automatically going to reduce the situations where we need to force tolerance, because there will be a natural acceptance and an appreciation of diversity and hardship. There's resilience to hardship, then you don't see it as hardship, you see it as, well, this is how it is, but we have resources inside us and people outside us supporting us, and we are going to get through this together.
So thanks for that. And I'm sure that Pranali's got, different perspectives now on this. And in fact, Varsha, that has been my experience sometimes, very often when I'm engaging with adolescents. And, I'm sometimes amazed at their level of self-awareness. And when I see that self-awareness, immediately what I'm seeing with it is the level of empathy that they have for others. They tend to see outside of themselves. They're looking at helping others and helping people in the community. These are the youngsters whom I find are very proactive in seeking to help or to, participate in kind of positive ventures in the community, And I find that the more they are engaging in these positive community ventures, they also are developing very good resilience, So it's kind of just so networked, And so much comes from that self-awareness and self-esteem. So, Dakshayani, my question to you would be that, what might, because I'm trying to now connect the social emotional learning to issues like bullying, academic stress, all these challenging issues that come up in schools. So what might your teachers specifically be doing? Like, if you can give me just one or two examples of what teachers might be doing in order to build the students' ability to self-regulate their behavior, and thus manage the bullying, thus manage, say, the academic stress, etc.
Absolutely. This is one of the things that happens in every school, I suppose. However careful you are, you will have to come across this kind of incidents. And most of the times, when we talk about bullying incidents that have taken place, you won't believe if I tell you that it happens, that the bully has done it unknowingly. He wouldn't even know why he's doing it. And the other child gets bullied automatically. So first thing that we do is a counseling session. Group counseling and guidance sessions are very, very important to ensure that you understand the code of conduct and behavior. But what we do differently is that we have a collaborative discussion saying that, okay, these are the issues that we face every year and what should be the consequence, what should be the code of conduct. And especially the senior students are involved here so that they become the ambassadors of how they need to behave. And the second thing, very, very surprising, is that we would have had a list of everything that happened in the previous years. And then, discuss that in the group while making these collaborative rules. But this time, the issue that you get will be entirely different from what you got last year.
Right.
So we brainstorm and involve a good chunk of students into it, a couple of parent representatives into it, and they come up with the self-regulation rules that they need to have and the code of conduct that is expected. The school culture is like that. And definitely teachers will be observant, maintaining, as Ms. Varsha said, it's a continuous observation that happens. The teachers will have to have an eye. And if the child is behaving, as Ms. Mary said, it's always that your happy child yesterday is not happy today. So how is he reacting? That kind of observation has to be done. This is one thing that is continuously done. And reinforcement of things that happen anywhere else, not in your school, is done in the form of activities, clubs, and, even in the class is a general talk that goes in, okay, in this particular place, this incident had happened. If you were to be in that position, what would you have done? Such current happenings regarding bullying, regarding depression, regarding, physical abuse, anything that happens is discussed continuously in the class so that they're all on the same page. So these are the only ways that I feel, because when they feel that they are a part of it, they take the ownership and they say the school culture is expected to be like this, and this is the kind of behavior that needs to be there. I've had students coming and telling me that I have asked my parent not to talk like this to my teacher. So there would be a problem, but definitely my parent cannot talk to my teacher this way. I will not agree. So when they take the responsibility, everything else falls in place. Luckily, I think students understand today, and they are with us. And these are some things that we do.
No, thank you so much, Dakshayani. And I think you spoke about something very interesting about the students themselves being ambassadors. So in fact, in a way, being almost like mental health ambassadors. In fact, I just in fact had a training program where I was training some training individuals in an organization, and these are colleagues who've actually they have themselves proactively taken up the role of being a mental health ambassador in the organization. And in fact, it goes with something which Dr. Vikram Patel, very well-known psychiatrist, has spoken about, the concept of task shifting. That we might be teachers, we might be managers, but we can also take on some other important roles in the community, and how, as perhaps teachers or even students, how we can also be mental health ambassadors in the community in which we are, So I think that was very interesting. And Mary, going from here, my question to you is that, would you all in your teacher training programs be actually training teachers on self-regulation of their emotions, on building up their relationship skills with teachers, with other students and teachers? And, you know, what exactly would you be doing for this? Maybe just one example of how you might be, you know, training teachers on these very important SEL skills themselves.
Yeah. So what we do is one of the first areas that we expose our students to, or the teacher learners to, is getting into deep reading. Because deep reading books like, you know, Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck, or Peak, Man's Search for Meaning, because all of these books, actually the theme or the central idea of these books is building in you, you know, actually reflecting on yourself, building self-awareness. Okay, and from self-awareness leading to, for example, when you read Man's Search for Meaning, you know, you end up thinking that, yes, do I have a purpose in life? Because if I have a purpose, do I have a goal in life? Because if I have a goal, only then will I be able to push my children in my class, or encourage my children in my class to have these goals, to have these purpose, to find meaning in what they're doing, to find relevance in what they're doing. So what we do is we have 3 clear areas where we incorporate this, to be, whether it is to build social awareness, social skills, self-awareness, any of these aspects. It is firstly put into our curriculum. Everything that we do, the learning theories, the critiquing of learning theories, or understanding what teaching is all about, the role of a teacher, everything brings the aspect of why you need to be emotionally agile or emotionally intelligent. What do you even mean by that? So the theory or the knowledge component is taken care of. Then we have the pedagogical methods. Under the pedagogical methods, the biggest challenge teachers face today with children, why are children distracted in the classrooms or struggling in the classroom? It is because they are not actively engaged. And there's a misconception of the word actively engaged, where they feel it's about activities and not, but active learning is more about cognitively, you know, applying, understanding. Cognitive thinking has to be in action here. So we then teach them pedagogical strategies that enables them to understand why these strategies are so important in the classroom. Classroom management skills are also discussed in the classroom, but it is never taught to them. It is more about enabling them to understand what the challenge is by, you know, putting across case studies and asking the teachers to analyze. So it's a self-developing or a self-directed learning environment, or a guided discovery learning environment that we create in the classrooms. And the last one is the environment or the climate of the institute itself. There, what we do is we ensure that we as faculty, we practice what we speak. Teachers are the role models. So be it adults or for children, like Dr. Dakshayani mentioned earlier, we are the role models. Therefore, what we practice, the kind of the interaction that we have with our teacher learners, the kind of behaviors that we incorporate, all of these things ensure that we show our emotional intelligence to them, so that they are not only just observing and learning from us, they are also then able to show it to their learners when they have collaborative activities. You know, we take learning through the design thinking process, which is completely about learning and collaboration. It is not empathy. All of these competencies are built when the students take up something like, you know, they identify a problem and they use the design thinking process to find a solution to those problems. It cannot happen in isolation. Therefore, collaboration, understanding each other's skills, all of these things are what we do in ITARI. I hope I've addressed your question, Dr. Desai.
Right. Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's really nice that you know, when you say we cannot teach them, you know, to do certain things. And I think that's something that has to move forward in the classroom also, you know. As teachers, we can't really put SEL as a part of the curriculum where it's going to be graded and you're going to get marks on it, you know. But I think it's also a lot of, you know, how we are role modeling and how we are taking it forward. And in fact, you know, when we're almost at the end of our program is when I'm getting some very interesting questions. So with your permission of the panelists, I'll drag this out a little 5 to 7 minutes, because I think there's some nice questions here. I'm going to first take Pranali's question again, and Varsha, if I can hand hand this over to you. The question is, how can we teach empathy to our students when they might never have experienced a particular situation? Okay, and I think I have another one question for our other two panelists. So I think that's going to be interesting. So Varsha, first over to you.
Okay, so this is a beautiful, beautiful question, and it's also a tough thing to do in practice.
Yes.
So this is not a one-time thing, it is ongoing. So as Mary already mentioned about role modeling, that is the most powerful way of getting kids to understand what's empathy. So if someone is misbehaving and we don't get angry and we are not reactive in that moment, we've taken a deep breath, we've done our mindfulness thing in between classes and before, and we are not reactive and we react empathetically. So not reactive, right, but react empathically. Then the children see how we have reacted. So maybe at home, maybe this is a situation where a child has got very harsh punishment at home. Then they have never seen this kind of a response, that a student was rude to a teacher and the teacher didn't bat an eyelid and it didn't bother her one bit, because her self-confidence doesn't depend on what if a student insults her. No, it's like, okay, the student said something awful to me. That means the student has a problem. So let us see, do we understand what the problem is here? Also, children and teens don't want to be told how they feel. So we want to ask them. So if someone is rude or someone is whatever, and we are modeling empathy for the child who wants to learn about empathy, is we are going to ask that person, okay, so you said or did this thing, and it sounds like maybe you're angry or frustrated, or whatever the case may be. Am I right? Is that how it is? What is it? What is it that caused you to say that? So we have completely deflected it from ourselves to the issue, and we have demonstrated empathy. So now this other child at another time, see, this is not a one-time thing. At another time, when the child who you want to teach empathy to is probably also going to interact with you, and you want to go out of your way. Now this is proactive, because you've observed the class, you're very, very aware. This is your own awareness. You're very aware of what each child is all about. And this is the child who watched you being empathic to others. This is the child who really wants to learn how to be empathic, or doesn't even know that empathy is a thing yet. And you express warmth. Warmth is in everything. Warmth is in words, warmth is in body language, warmth is in your gaze. And when that child experiences the warmth that they haven't experienced before, something happens within that child. They cannot label it in that moment, but there is an awareness that this is a different experience, and it felt good. It was an affirmative experience. And the next time something happens, and the same thing happens again, either to that child or to somebody else, this child is observing something that doesn't exist in their home environment or their neighborhood or wherever they are, and they are learning a different way of being in the world. And then they're seeing the response of other people. And basically, we as educators or parents or whoever, we have to practice this. And even when we're having a bad day, we have to have our teacher buddies or counselor buddies or somebody help us not have burnout and not get frustrated. Take a few deep breaths together and do our own mindfulness thing to say that, I'm going to come back to my baseline.
Right. Thank you so much, Varsha. And as I was listening, I was thinking about, how the teacher, I think very importantly, has to be able to role model whatever she wants the child to do. I mean, she can't be screaming and shouting in the classroom and expecting the child to be empathetic to others, right? So I think it matters so much in terms of reflective behavior, self-awareness, everything of the teacher herself. So I'm sure Pranali's got a good take on that. And Dakshayani, I see a question here. I see a question from Priyanka Chaudhary. Nice question, and I'm sure you deal with it often, Dakshayani. And I'm going to read this out to you from Priyanka Chaudhary. How to deal with a case where a teacher imposes his or her personal baggage on the student as a result of their personality, because a student cannot deliberately avoid the teacher. So is this frustrating for the student too? So generally, I would say that, I'm sure that you also are dealing constantly with teachers who come with their own baggage, offload it onto the kids. Kids are frustrated. I mean, how do you handle this?
See, basically what would happen is in the initial discussion of the teacher itself, you would have had the induction. You would have told exactly they need, we expect what from them. So as soon as they come, first thing that we observe is that, whether the teacher is able to leave her baggage outside, get into the class and make the class happy. Because the first 1 minute of the teacher, as soon as she enters the class, determines what kind of class it's going to be. The body language, the smile that she had, the way. But yes, it so happens that there are some teachers who require constant observation, and it's not difficult to find out who are these teachers who actually come up with that kind of behavior, because very few are there, a handful of there. And we keep observing these classes continuously. We also have the feedback system where children give us feedback without any fear, because they don't put their names there. They just give us the feedback, and that is always confidential. We also have suggestion boxes that are kept. It does happen that children become introverts, they won't talk in the class, and the same child is going to be talking very nicely in other classes, and you can clearly make out the difference. And constant counseling is the only way, one-on-one counseling that we actually have with the teachers is going to make the difference. It doesn't happen overnight. Definitely doesn't happen. It requires a lot of counseling that continuously happens. And children are encouraged not to complain, but objectively to come and tell us the problems that they have. This is a continuous process. Every second month, they give a feedback. They give a feedback to...
That's wonderful. Yeah.
Class teacher. They do it on Google Forms, so it is completely anonymous. And they openly tell, they say that this is the issue that we have. We don't have anything against the teacher. She's very good, ma'am. Please don't talk to her rudely. But this is the issue that we have with her. So that culture becomes very easy for us.
I think that's great that, students have a voice. Yeah. Yes. And that they can come to you in an anonymous fashion. So it is without fear. And also that, for the teachers also, that counseling approach. Because, none of us come in anywhere perfect. We are never perfect. Like Varsha and I always talk, we are always work in progress, each one of us. And I think, for schools to have more and more this kind of pathways available, I think that's fantastic. So my last question, Mary, and because, like you said, you've been both as a teacher and a teacher trainer, there is this question that, very often or at times, this question is from Ishita Saha, and she says that, parents often deny and even support their child's inappropriate behavior in school or classroom when they are called in for a parent meeting. And, what can be done by teachers and counselors, I would say as a collaborative approach, what do you think, can be done? What would you have to say to Ishita about this?
Okay, so, if I have to, I'm just looking at it the way I have dealt it in my classroom, and I've also seen many teachers, having dealt it successfully in their practices also.
Right.
It is very important for us to be, again, I'm using the word proactive. When parents tell us something, they are telling you about their child, telling us that my child is really good at home, he's really good at drawing or at writing or whatever it is, or behaves very well, because they are seeing it only from that perspective of the time that is being spent at home. But, I think nearly about 8 hours is spent in school. And for the teacher to then tell the parent during a parent-teacher meeting saying that, there's a lot of behavioral issues or lack of, he's not interested in his work, I think it's very shocking for a parent to take. Again, here, what is required is for the teacher to have empathy here. Even though she knows what she's saying is the truth, she still needs to have the empathy to understand how would I take it if they told me the same about my child? How would I react? So
Right.
one good thing is when you see the first incident, the second incident, or the third incident, we have a system in school where we say the first time we kind of interact with the child and, tell him or her that, do you think what you did was okay? Do you think there should have been a change? Do you think you would have been okay if this hadn't happened to you? So you have the stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. But the suggestion here is at stage 3, have a conversation with a parent, alert a parent in time. One of the challenges that we do not alert parents on time. We throw it on their faces when they come for a PTA meeting, which is,
Right.
a parent cannot take it. Secondly, another practice that I had in the classroom was when an incident happens, I ask both parties to write a small, I give them a piece of paper and I tell them, you write why you acted the way you did. And I also want the other person to independently write what he or she did at that point, what he or she felt at that point, and then with permission, we allow them to exchange notes. And many a times, we have seen that children, after understanding the other child's perspective, they have voluntarily apologized. So you don't even have to take this to the parent. We need to identify what exactly do I want to take to the parent, at what is the appropriate time I want to take it to the parent. So keeping these evidences in your classroom and getting your parents into the conversation with the child, understanding, maybe put it very mildly, asking the parent, yesterday I noticed a behavior, Pranav was a little upset in class. Did he carry it home, or was he fine at home? You're getting your parent into a conversation where the parent says, I did not notice, but definitely I'll keep my eye open. So the parent has been alerted in a very nice way. So I think that diplomatic and right approach, it's not just being diplomatic, that's the right approach, because there is where empathy comes into action, Dr. Desai. I'm empathizing with that parent because tomorrow it could be my child and somebody. So I think empathy plays a key factor here, and also, spacing out the complaints and not running to the parent for every little thing that you see, especially in today's time, and more importantly, getting your child engaged in your classroom. That is very important, and that is where the teacher's knowledge, her domain expertise, and more importantly, her situational awareness comes into place. Being able to talk to the child, being in the moment with the child. I think all of these can get children to understand what the teacher is trying to say. These are the approaches that has worked for me. So I'm sharing my what works for me. Yeah.
And I think that's a very counseling approach, if I may say, with empathy being one of the foremost, the key counseling skills, that we need to have. So with this, I'm going to close this conversation, and I would just like each one of you to take just a minute in order to close this session from your perspective. Varsha, I know I need to keep this open, but there's actually a question of how to inculcate attitude of gratitude. And so if you can close, give your closing statement with, how can we build an attitude of gratitude, that would be great. And then I will go on to my closing statements for Dakshayani and Mary. And I would like to thank all the participants who've stayed on. I think you really enjoyed what you have to say. So Varsha, let me get your closing statement on this.
Okay, so if you go into literature, there are lots of exercises, very structured exercises about gratitude exercises, writing thank you notes and counting your blessings and doing all those things. And they're all useful. All of them are useful. But again, the most useful thing about creating a classroom culture or schoolhouse culture of gratitude is actually modeling it. So for everything, for actually saying thank you, if you need the fan switched on or off, you ask somebody to do it and say thank you, or you do whatever, get something thank you, whatever, you say thank you, you remind the kids to say thank you to each other. So saying thank you and meaning it, and not just say, oh, thanks. So when you thank somebody, why are we thanking them? Or even saying small things, like if something's frustrating, we're very quick to say, that's such a bother, or this happened, or it's raining, or whatever. But if we follow it up with, but, usually if we say something nice and then say, but, we cancel out the nice things. So, but if we say something that's critical and not nice, and then we say, but, I'm grateful for this. This is awful, but I'm grateful for that. So we are constantly modeling self-talk or a dialogue with yourself loudly, out loud, about how to turn everything into a glass half full experience. And then the kids hopefully imbibe it as they go.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much, Varsha. Again, thanks for being with us. Dakshayani, anything from your end to close this wonderful session from your people?
I think if we address SEL properly in the classroom, Dr. Smita, all other problems that we're facing today will go off. This intolerance in students, or teachers not behaving well. The social emotional learning has to happen both for teachers as well as students. This will remove aggressive behavior. This will remove the bullying, because everybody starts understanding the other person, being empathetic, being grateful, and also understand how to actually communicate, collaborate, and the 21st century skills will come in. I think all the issues that we have today, even in the society, to extend it to, will go off if we actually plan it and make sure that this is given more importance than academics, because that's what I feel needs to be done today. And with
thanks, Dakshayani. Thanks. And when you're talking just now, I was thinking about a workshop which I used to do, which was emotional intelligence in the classroom and in the staff room. And how there were such common factors happening in the classroom and happening in the staff room, and how teachers were coming out with it. And, they also were laughing about it, that we behave in the staff room just like our kids behave in the classroom, And so over to you, Mary, for the last statement from you.
Because your title also has the concept of a happy classroom. So a happy classroom is when children are happy in the classroom. And what has happened in today's materialistic times is happiness is connected, is equivalent to, people see it as successful is happiness. But what I would like to tell the teachers, and so that they can tell their children, is that happiness is loving what you do. And loving what you do will come, the awareness of me loving what I do comes from us as teachers building these emotional intelligence skills in our children, so that our children are able to identify what they love to do rather than somebody else forcing them to do. So for me, happiness is, I just want to close with Immanuel Kant's quote, where he has said that God has not willed you to be happy. He wants you to make yourself happy. So it is in me to make myself happy. So the emotional intelligence is required for that. We as teachers need to provide it to our students. So thank you so much, Dr. Desai. Thank you,
Mary. Wonderful way to end our session. I think it all goes down to self-awareness, self-acceptance, self-respect. So Dr. Varsha, Dr. Dakshayani, and Mary, thank you for an absolutely wonderful session. This is, I think an overwhelming topic which permeates into every part of our life, and I think as caregivers for children, for I think the next generation that comes up, I think if we keep it in the forefront of everything we do, we are heading towards a better world, right? So thank you so much. Varsha, you want to say something? You want to end with something?
Yes. 1 minute.
Yes.
It's to add to that gratitude. I just wanted to add to that is when we model it, if we say thank you, even for negative feedback, like for example, if someone gives us criticism or says something negative and we say thank you for that, then we have really modeled being grateful even for something that's negative.
Yeah, because I mean that negative or critical is also something we learn from, right?
Yes,
I mean, that's
absolutely.
what's going to move us forward. Everything positive and pleasant is wonderful, but in a way, it kind of keeps us where we are. And if we can learn to handle something critical, well, then I think it's going to be good for us. And I think if we are, self-respecting, we will question things, but we won't always doubt ourselves. I think that's where self-awareness and self-acceptance comes in. So thank you, ladies. Thank you for a wonderful session. And thank you, participants, for being so engaging. I have tried to address most of the questions, and we look forward to having you with us at our next webinar. Our next webinar is on the very, difficult issue of child sexual abuse. So that's our next Wednesday webinar. And of course, this Saturday, we have a workshop on happy classrooms, can happiness be taught, learned, etc.? So of course, we look forward to participation on that too. Thank you everyone and have a very, very good evening. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Desai. Thank you so much.
Nice meeting all of you. Thank you.